The first time my father's voice cut through the wedding crowd and told me to go home, I honestly thought he was talking to someone else. The music was loud, the champagne was flowing, and people were laughing under strings of soft golden lights. For a second, I actually believed the humiliation hovering in the air belonged to another woman. But then he said my name, sharp, irritated final, and the entire room seemed to tilt. Guests turned their heads. My mother stepped back like she didn't want to be associated with me, and my sister, the bride, lifted her chin with that polished little smile she always used whenever she'd already won. "Today is not your day," my father said, as if I'd demanded to take her spotlight, as if I hadn't spent the last 3 years taking care of our grandfather, so she could live her perfect, curated life. I felt every stare like a hand on my back, shoving me toward the exit. And even then, even in the middle of that humiliation, I will never forget I could not have predicted what would come the next morning, when my parents called me again and again demanding I hand over the land Grandpa legally left to me. They wanted something from me that day, and they thought they already owned it. I hadn't slept well in weeks, but that night after the wedding sleep didn't come at all. The sound of my father's voice, stern, disappointed, so public, kept replaying in my head. I drove home under a sky smeared with clouds, my headlights cutting through pockets of fog. It was a 2-hour drive, but it felt longer because the silence inside the car was so heavy. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't take a phone call. I watched the road unspool in front of me like something I had to escape before I collapsed. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the porch light I'd left on earlier cast a soft circle on the steps. It was almost comforting, almost enough to make me forget the way my mother avoided my eyes as I walked out of the reception. I stepped inside, closed the door quietly, and the house swallowed me in stillness. I didn't cry, not then. I felt too hollow to cry. The next morning, sunlight slipped in between the blinds, as if nothing earth-shattering had happened. My phone, still on the kitchen table where I'd dropped it, flashed with missed calls. At first, I didn't look closely. I figured maybe someone wanted to know if I'd made it home safely, but then I picked it up and saw the names. Mom, Dad, Aubrey, Mom, Dad. 23 missed calls since dawn. For a moment I stood frozen. They hadn't called or texted me in days before the wedding. They'd barely spoken to me at the reception. And yet now, within hours of sending me home like an inconvenience, my phone was lighting up like a fire alarm. Then a voicemail notification appeared. I pressed play. "Olivia, honey, please answer," my mother said, her voice tight and urgent. "We need to talk about the land. It's important for the family." I felt a strange jolt in my stomach. The land. 32 acres of wooded property on the outskirts of Fairhaven, the land my grandfather left to me in his will. The land I had helped him care for since I was a teenager. The land where he taught me the difference between pine and fir, where he said the air smelled different after the rain, because it carried stories. The land where he died peacefully in the home he built with his own hands. I sat down at the kitchen table, trying to absorb her words. They weren't calling about the wedding. They weren't calling to apologize for humiliating me in front of 100 guests. They weren't calling to ask if I was okay. They wanted the land. My chest tightened. I knew my parents could be controlling. I knew my sister Aubrey always got what she wanted. But I had never imagined they'd move this quickly, less than 12 hours after telling me to leave her wedding. The phone buzzed again. Dad this time. I didn't answer. I needed a moment to breathe. Instead, I stared out the window toward the line of trees at the edge of my backyard. The sunlight caught on the last yellow leaves clinging to the branches. For years, I'd spent every free weekend helping Grandpa clear fallen limbs, trimming back overgrowth, learning how to care for a piece of land like it was a living thing. After he passed, the property felt like the last piece of him I had left. The phone vibrated again, and I finally picked up. Dad didn't bother with a greeting. "Liv, we need you to bring the land papers over," he said, brisk and businesslike, as if he were talking to an employee who'd forgotten a deadline. "Why?" I asked, my voice low. There was a pause. Then, "Your sister has plans. She wants to start a wellness retreat. Investors are involved. It'll be good for the family." A wellness retreat. That sounded exactly like the kind of project Aubrey would love: luxurious cabins, curated spa packages, yoga on wooden decks overlooking the forest. Something Instagram could adore. But what did that have to do with me? I forced out the question. Why my land? It's not just your land, Dad said sharply, as if correcting a child. It was always meant for the family. I closed my eyes, anger flickering in my chest. Grandpa's will was not ambiguous. He had left the property solely to me, not to be shared, not to be divided, not for Aubrey's business ventures. Dad, I said slowly, Grandpa made his wishes clear. Grandpa wasn't thinking clearly near the end, he snapped. He said a lot of things. What matters is that Aubrey needs the land now. There it was, the truth behind the urgency. Aubrey needed. Aubrey wanted. Aubrey deserved. Story of my childhood. I clenched the phone, remembering late nights spent at Grandpa's bedside while Aubrey was out building her social image. Remembering birthdays, she missed holidays. She arrived late to the way my parents laughed it off because Aubrey's busy, dear. She has a lot going on. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said, Dad, I'm not making any decisions today. He exhaled sharply. We already told the investors the land would be available. That sentence hit me like a blow. Already told, already promised, without asking me. I barely had time to process it before a second call came through from Aubrey. I waited 2 rings before answering. Her voice was airy sweet, the way she always sounded when she wanted something. Liv, we've been trying to reach you. Listen, I need Grandpa's land for my retreat. You get it right. This is a huge opportunity, an opportunity for who I asked. For all of us, she said, but her tone slipped, revealing the truth. Mostly for me. But that's fine. You'll get credit in the family newsletter. My throat tightened. She said it like she was being generous. Then she added lightly, but with steel underneath. Don't make this complicated. It's not like you're doing anything with the land. I stood abruptly from the table, my hands shaking. I visit it every week, I said. I take care of it. Exactly, she chirped. You're maintaining it. I want to make it useful. Useful. That word sank into me like a thorn. To who, I asked again. To the family, she said, impatience creeping in. Look, the investors need to see movement. The zoning meeting is already set for Thursday. I told Dad you'd bring the papers today. You what? My voice rose without my permission. Don't overreact, she said. Just bring the deed. It'll take you 10 minutes. I couldn't speak. She rushed on, her voice tightening. Liv, don't ruin this for me. Not after last night. I blinked. Last night you embarrassed everyone by storming out of the wedding, she said. So dramatic. My mouth fell open. Aubrey, Dad told me to leave. Oh, please, she scoffed. You misunderstood. You always misunderstand. And there it was, the manipulation I'd grown up choking on. I finally ended the call, my pulse thrumming in my ears. I stood in my kitchen surrounded by sunlight, my phone buzzing with more incoming calls, and for the first time in my life I felt something inside me shift. Not rage, not grief, clarity. They weren't calling because they cared. They were calling because they believed they owned me and everything Grandpa entrusted to me. I turned off my phone, walked outside, and breathed in the crisp morning air. The trees stood tall and steady, exactly the way Grandpa taught me to be. You listen to land like it speaks, he once told me, placing my hand against the trunk of an old oak. That's why I'm giving it to you. Because you hear what others ignore. I didn't know then what he meant. But that morning, standing barefoot on the cool earth, I understood perfectly. They weren't fighting for the land. They were fighting for control. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to give it to them. The phone was still turned off when I walked into the kitchen the next morning, but the silence felt deceptive, like the quiet of a forest right before a storm breaks. I made coffee, leaned against the counter, and listened to the steady drip of the machine. I told myself I'd turn the phone on after breakfast. After I showered. After I took a breath. But avoidance never lasts long, and eventually my thumb hovered above the power button. When the screen lit up, it vibrated with a violence that made my stomach twist. 23 missed calls yesterday, 9 more already this morning. A tight string of voicemails, all from my parents or from Aubrey. The newest voicemail from Mom began to play automatically. Olivia answer. We need the land papers today. Don't be difficult. Not one word about the wedding. Not one acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just straight into demands. The entitlement in her voice slithered under my skin, raising a sting of heat in my chest. I set the phone down and walked to the window. Beyond the glass, the forest swayed gently in the morning breeze. The tops of the fir trees trembled like they were whispering secrets to one another. 32 acres. Grandpa's land. The land he left to me explicitly, legally, unquestionably. He'd trusted me with it, because I was the one who stayed, who showed up, who learned how to prune branches, without scarring the bark, who sat with him through every hard winter and every doctor's appointment. When I closed my eyes, I could still smell the warm, earthy scent of his workshop. Still hear him say, "You treat land with respect, Liv, and it will take care of you in return." The phone buzzed again. "Dad," I let it ring once, twice, 3 times before pressing accept. "We need you to come over," he said, skipping any greeting, any basic pleasantries. "We've talked things through and we need the deed. Today. Investors are waiting." Investors. He said it like a threat, like a weight I was supposed to carry for them. "Dad," I said quietly. "What investors?" He exhaled sharply, annoyed that I dared ask. "Aubrey's wellness retreat project has real momentum. If this goes through, it could put our family on the map. People are excited. We've been working on this for months. But none of it can move forward without your land." "My land," I repeated slowly. "It's family land," he corrected. "Your grandfather meant for all of us to benefit from it." I thought of Grandpa's will sitting in my file cabinet, the clear handwriting, the highlighted lines, the lawyer's signature. I thought of him looking at me the night before he passed, his voice rough but steady when he said, "You're the steward now. Protect it." "Dad," I said, "that's not what Grandpa wrote." He was confused, he said immediately. "You know that. He wasn't thinking clearly those last few months." We all heard him say the land should be shared. "No," I whispered, "you all decided to hear that." Before he could answer, another call buzzed through Aubrey. I hung up on Dad and answered hers. "Liv," she breathed dramatically, "thank God. You've been impossible to reach. I've been thinking," I said, keeping my voice level, "about yesterday. About the wedding. About what you said." "Ugh," she cut in. "Are we really still doing this?" "Yesterday was stressful. You misunderstood, Dad. Nobody asked you to leave. You made things bigger than they needed to be." I felt my jaw tighten. The room suddenly felt smaller, hotter. I didn't misunderstand anything. "Can you stop being emotional for once?" she said lightly, which was how she always disguised her cruelty, as calm, reasonable logic. "We need the land. The investors are nervous. I told them there was nothing to worry about. But if you keep acting like this, acting like what I demanded, like this is about you," she snapped before catching herself. Then her tone softened to something syrupy. "Liv, be reasonable. I need this. I've worked my whole life for something like this." I blinked at the absurdity. "You worked your whole life, Aubrey. You didn't even visit Grandpa more than twice a year." "I was busy," she said instantly. "Career, social obligations. You know my schedule is insane." I knew she dressed insane, like a designer coat, proud of how her life always required more attention than mine. "A wellness retreat is my dream," she continued. "And your land is perfect. Investors love the location. Dad said we could break ground by September. Dad said," I echoed, "break ground." "You're talking about bulldozers. They'll design it to be eco-friendly," she argued. "Come on. Don't start being weird about the forest. It's just trees. You're acting like Grandpa willed you a national monument." My heart pounded. It's not just trees. It was his life. And he trusted me to do what she shot back. Keep it empty forever. That's selfish, Liv. And honestly, it's kind of pathetic. I sucked in a shaky breath. There it was, the real Aubrey. Not the polished bride smiling gracefully for photos. Not the woman my parents adored, defended, praised. But the voice that had always whispered that my worth came second. "I'm not giving you the deed," I said quietly. Silence. Then a cold, controlled reply. "You don't get to say no." I almost laughed at the familiarity of her tone. Of course Aubrey believed she had the power to override my decisions. She'd been raised to believe the world rearranged itself for her benefit. "Watch me," I said finally, and ended the call. For a long moment I stood still in the center of the kitchen, letting the quiet wrap around me. I felt something forming inside, something I'd never allowed myself to feel before. Not guilt, not hesitation, but certainty. My phone buzzed again. A text from Mom. "Your Aunt Linda remembers Grandpa saying the land should be shared." I stared at the message, my heart thudding. The revisionist history had begun. If they said it enough times, they expected me to believe it. A second text came through. "Stop making this difficult. Aubrey is counting on you." I set the phone back on the counter as though it burned my palm. It was shocking how quickly they shifted into a unified front. They couldn't agree on Thanksgiving dinner or holiday travel plans, but suddenly they were speaking as one voice, rewriting the story, erasing the parts they didn't like, shaping something convenient and profitable. I walked into the living room and opened the drawer where I kept Grandpa's will. The paper felt soft from how often I'd unfolded it during the weeks after he passed. The ink had faded just slightly at the edges, but the words remained sharp. "To my granddaughter Olivia, who has cared for this land with loyalty and understanding." I traced the letters with my fingertip and a lump formed in my throat. The ache of losing him hit me fresh and raw. A memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought about in years. I was 19, standing beside Grandpa as he hammered a new latch onto the barn door. Aubrey had just gotten a fancy internship out of state. My mother was gushing about her future potential, and I'd made some offhand joke about being the backup daughter. Grandpa paused, mid-hammer, looked right at me and said, "You're not the backup anything. You're the one who shows up." And then he handed me the keys to the barn. As that memory washed over me, the phone rang again. "Dad." This time I picked up. "Liv," he said, clipped and impatient. "We're trying to be reasonable. Bring the deed. We told investors the papers would be ready by Thursday." "You did what?" My voice cracked. "You're overreacting," he said. "This is an investment in the family. Aubrey has the chance to build something. Don't sabotage her. Sabotage." The word made my stomach twist with disbelief. "I'm not sabotaging her," I said. "I'm protecting the land." More silence. Then he lowered his voice into the tone he used whenever he wanted obedience. "You will bring the papers. Aubrey needs them." There was never a sentence in my childhood that carried more weight than that one. Aubrey needs new ballet lessons. Aubrey needs a more expensive dress. Aubrey needs the college fund. Aubrey needs the car on weekends. Aubrey needs more space. Aubrey needs more time. Aubrey needs... So naturally now, Aubrey needed my land. My breath trembled as I said, "I won't do it." Then I hung up and turned my phone off again. The house fell into a deeper silence than before. Not peaceful, more like the air right before thunder cracks the sky open. I stepped outside, crossing the yard until my boots touched the dirt path that led toward Grandpa's land. Morning light glimmered across the fields, highlighting patches of frost that sparkled like scattered glass. The air smelled like pine earth and old memories. I closed my eyes and breathed in. It hit me then, my parents, my sister, the investors, all of them, they saw the land as currency, as a canvas for profit, as something to exploit and reshape, something expendable. But Grandpa had seen something different. And so did I. This land was a heartbeat, a story, a memory, a promise. And no matter how many times they called, no matter how creative their guilt-tripping became, no matter how loudly they insisted it belonged to the family, I knew the truth. It wasn't theirs. And if they tried to take it, they were about to learn a very painful lesson. I walked the path a little farther, feeling steadier with each step. For years I had convinced myself that keeping my head down was the only way to preserve peace. That silence was safer than confrontation. That love meant accommodating the needs of the people who needed me least, but demanded the most. Not anymore. A breeze moved through the trees, rustling the branches like a quiet applause. Grandpa once told me land remembers the hands that care for it. Maybe he was right. Because as I stood there, surrounded by everything he entrusted to me, something long dormant inside me lifted its head. Boundaries, strength, courage. Call it whatever you want, something in me was waking up. When I turned my phone on the next morning, the silence startled me more than the non-stop calls ever had. No missed calls, no new voicemails, no frantic texts flashing across the screen. Just a blank notification bar staring back at me like an eye that had closed itself on purpose. My parents were never quiet. Aubrey was never quiet. Not when they wanted something. And the sudden stillness felt calculated, not merciful, like they were regrouping behind closed doors, rewriting the story, deciding which version of events would break me fastest. Then a single text appeared from Mom. We talked to some relatives. They remember things differently about Grandpa's land. I froze in the middle of the kitchen. The sun was barely up, washing the counters in soft gold. Outside, birds called to each other like it was any ordinary day. But nothing about the quiet in my house felt ordinary. It felt like the pause before a blade falls. I stared at the message, my chest tightening. They remember things differently. Those 5 words meant only one thing: they were preparing a new narrative. A version where Grandpa hadn't left the land solely to me. A version where family inheritance meant Aubrey had an equal claim. A version where I was the unreasonable one for refusing to hand over what they had already decided was theirs. I set the phone down and pressed both palms against the table, grounding myself. This wasn't new. My parents had always been experts at reframing history to suit the outcome they wanted. They did it when Aubrey failed a semester in college. She was overloaded. The professor didn't support her properly. They did it when she totaled her car. The road was poorly lit. The other driver must have been distracted. They did it when I confronted them about the 100 ways they sidelined me growing up. You were always so self-sufficient. We didn't want to interfere. Now they were doing it again. But this time the stakes were different. This time the rewriting wasn't about excuses. It was about ownership. Before I could sit down, the phone buzzed again. "Dad," I answered. "Good morning," he said, but his voice carried none of the warmth a father should have. "Your mother sent you a message." "Correct, I saw it," I said. "We've spoken with your Aunt Linda, your Uncle Tom, a few others," he continued. "They all remember Grandpa mentioning the land should be shared?" My stomach turned. "Dad, you know that's not true. You can't base everything on that piece of paper," he snapped. "That piece of paper," I said slowly, "is Grandpa's signed will." He wasn't thinking clearly, Dad repeated as if rehearsed. He changed his mind toward the end. He wanted fairness. "Fairness," I echoed. "So you're rewriting his last wishes to fit what Aubrey needs." His sigh was sharp, impatient. "Stop making this personal. It's a family matter." "It is personal," I whispered. "It's my name on the documents." There was a pause, just long enough for me to know he was gathering more ammunition. Before he could fire it, I ended the call. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It vibrated around me like pressure building under the earth. I walked to the bookshelf, opened the wooden box where I kept Grandpa's notes and letters. Among them was a map he'd drawn himself, pulled from memory, showing the boundaries of the land he inherited from his father, and later expanded. He had traced the southern ridge with a thick red pencil and written in blocky handwriting, "Stewardship Zone for Olivia." My throat tightened. There was no ambiguity, no room for shared intention, no hint of the fantasy my parents were pushing. The land was meant for me, for my care, for my stewardship. As I held the map, another memory surfaced: a warm spring afternoon years ago. I'd been helping Grandpa clear the brush near the old creek. Aubrey had come by for 10 minutes wearing sandals and a sundress, complaining the entire time about bugs, heat, and dirt. When she left, Grandpa shook his head and muttered, "Sweet girl, but she doesn't know how to listen to land." Then he'd looked at me and smiled. "But you do." My phone vibrated again, pulling me back to the present. Aubrey this time. I answered only because I knew she'd keep calling until she got what she wanted. Her voice was clipped, rehearsed. "Liv, we heard you're upset. You need to stop overthinking." "I'm not overthinking," I said. "I'm responding to the fact that you're all lying now." "Don't be dramatic," she sighed. "Mom called everyone. They all remember Grandpa wanted the land shared." "That's not true. It is true," she insisted. "You just forgot. You were close to him, but you weren't the only one he talked to." I felt a spark of anger in my chest. "Aubrey, you visited him less than a handful of times during his last year." She scoffed. "Liv, my life was chaotic. You know that. But he loved both of us. Don't be selfish. Don't twist his words." The audacity of that made me laugh, short, humorless. "I'm twisting his words. I have his will, his maps, his notes, everything he left behind." "Exactly," she replied. "You were alone with him. You influenced him." The accusation struck me like a slap. I tightened my grip on the phone. "I took care of him." I said, my voice low. "I cleaned his wounds. I managed his medications. I drove him to every appointment. I listened to him when he cried because his legs wouldn't support him anymore. I was with him when he took his last breath." "If that's influence to you, he was vulnerable," she cut in sharply. "You took advantage of that." For a moment I couldn't speak. The cruelty in her voice was surgical, sharp enough to cut through bone. Then I whispered, "You weren't there. You didn't see how strong he was. You didn't know him the way I did." Aubrey ignored every word. "We need the land, Liv. I'm asking you nicely. Don't make this difficult for me." There it was again, me. Difficult, not the situation, not the manipulation. Me. I ended the call. Almost immediately a notification appeared, an email from Harlan, Grandpa's old lawyer. Subject line: "We should speak soon. Important documents surfaced." My heart skipped. I opened it. Inside was a brief message: "Olivia, I found notes your grandfather left regarding the land trust. Call me." Harlan. Attached was a scanned image of a page written in Grandpa's handwriting. "Protect the property from misuse." Underneath it, circled twice, "Give Olivia guidance if needed." My vision blurred for a moment. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. Grandpa had known. He had seen this coming. And he had entrusted the right people to help me. But the relief didn't last long. Because as soon as I returned to the kitchen, I saw I had 12 new messages. "Mom, your sister is devastated. Dad, you're being unreasonable. Aubrey, do not ruin this for me. Mom, we're family. Act like it. Dad, investors are losing patience. Aunt Linda. Just sign the papers. Don't drag this out." I felt my hands shaking, not with fear, but with an anger I'd never allowed myself to feel as a child. An anger I'd buried under compromise, under obedience, under the comforting lie that keeping the peace was worth my silence. But standing in my kitchen that morning, surrounded by messages that weren't requests but commands, I finally saw the truth. They didn't want to understand me. They didn't want to listen. They didn't want to honor Grandpa's wishes. They wanted control. And when they couldn't get it with guilt, they would rewrite history. They would twist every memory, every conversation, every moment until I questioned myself. But I wasn't that girl anymore. The next time my phone buzzed, I didn't check who it was. I didn't need to. I walked to the window again and looked out at the forest, at the tall pines reaching toward the sky, at the sunlight breaking through branches like scattered gold. And just like that, clarity settled inside me. I wasn't fighting for money. I wasn't fighting for pride. I wasn't fighting for some petty family dispute. I was fighting for truth, for legacy, for the last thing Grandpa ever asked of me. As I stood there letting the weight of that sink in, another text came through, this one from the only aunt who ever treated me as more than background noise. "Liv, they think you'll give in. You always do." I exhaled slowly. Not this time. I turned off my phone, placed Grandpa's map back in its box, and whispered to the quiet room, "They're wrong." I opened the file Harlan sent me while the kettle hissed behind me, steam fogging the kitchen window. The PDF loaded slowly, as if it too hesitated to reveal what waited inside. When the first page appeared, my breath hitched. A sleek mock-up stretched across the screen, a luxury wellness retreat, with glass-walled cabins, cedar saunas, meditation domes, and a manicured trail looping around what was unmistakably my grandfather's land. My land, the land they had already claimed as theirs. Across the top, in glossy lettering, was the title, Aubrey Hale Wellness Sanctuary. I pressed my lips together, scrolling with a hand that trembled despite my best effort to stay calm. The second page held financial projections. Projected Year 1 revenue, $1.4 million. Expected subdivision expansion Phase 2, 12 at 18 luxury cabins. Phase 2, subdivision. I blinked hard, looking again. My chest tightened as I read the words printed boldly beneath the map. Proposed land. 32 acres, provided by family contribution. Family contribution. Provided. I wasn't mentioned anywhere. Of course not, I whispered. Because they never intended for me to matter. My phone rang. I almost didn't answer when Aubrey's name appeared, but letting her speak on her own terms had only made things worse. So this time I controlled the call. "Why is my land listed in your investor proposal?" I asked the moment I picked up. There was a pause, brief, sharp, before she recovered with her usual silky tone. "Live." "Oh, you saw the materials. Gorgeous, right? Investors absolutely love the concept." I clenched my jaw. "You didn't answer the question." "Don't be dramatic," she sighed. "We had to include the land for the pitch. Dad said it would be available. You know how these things work." "I don't," I said. "Because no one told me anything." Another beat of silence. Then she lowered her voice, softening it like she was speaking to a child. "Live, be reasonable. This retreat could change my life. You should want that for me. I want a lot of things," I said, "but none of them involve you taking the land Grandpa gave me." She exhaled loudly, exasperated, offended, incredulous. "You're being stubborn. This retreat is for the family." "There's no reference to family in the documents," I said. "Only you." "Well, I am the one running it," she said sharply. "Investors need a face, Liv. They're not investing in you." Something inside me went cold. "So I give you the land and you get the business. It's a perfect division," she chirped. "You get to feel useful and I get to succeed." "Useful," meaning I provide the asset, she takes the glory. "Aubrey," I said slowly, "what would I get in return for giving up my land?" A pause, then a laugh, light, dismissive. "You don't need a return. You're not the business type. Just be supportive. That's what families do." Families. The word tasted sour. "Aubrey, I found Dad's signature on the investor agreement. You both started all of this before even talking to me." She hesitated, then replied, "Well, yes, because we knew you'd react like this." "React like what?" emotionally she said, voice clipped. "Honestly, Liv, you don't understand business. You never have." The condescension stunned me for a moment, but when she continued talking, rattling about deadlines, meetings, her image, her future, the haze lifted and clarity struck again. This wasn't about family. This wasn't about legacy. This wasn't about Grandpa. This was about money and control, and Aubrey being the center of the universe, just like always. I ended the call mid-sentence. My hands were still shaking as I walked to the living room and sat down with Grandpa's map. The lines he'd drawn, the markings he'd made, clear, intentional, his handwriting steady, and certain, felt like a lifeline. Stewardship zone. For Olivia, not for the family, not for whoever shouts the loudest, not for the daughter who wants investors to think she owns everything. For me, because he trusted me. When my phone buzzed again, I expected another barrage of calls from Aubrey, but instead it was Harlan. "Can you come to my office?" he asked. "There's something you should see." I drove into town, heart thudding the entire way. Harlan's office sat above a hardware store, the same building Grandpa took me to when I was little for nails bolts and peppermint candies. The familiarity soothed me as I climbed the creaking stairs. Harlan greeted me with a small nod, his expression serious. "I found this in your grandfather's archived documents," he said, handing me a photocopied page. It seems he anticipated conflict. I scanned the words Grandpa's handwriting again, shaky near the edges, but unmistakably his. If the family pressures Olivia, guide her toward protective measures. My breath caught. Below that, another line circled in dark ink. She must protect the land from misuse. Misuse, not development, not commercialization. Misuse. Your grandfather was clear, Harlan said gently. He knew what he wanted. I swallowed hard emotion thick in my throat. They're trying to say he wanted it shared. He didn't, Harlan said. And legally, his will is airtight. They won't win that argument. For a moment, relief washed through me. But it didn't last long. Harlan, I said slowly, they're rewriting history. They're calling relatives spreading lies, pretending they remember things differently. He folded his hands. I'm not surprised. Pressure often leads people to twist reality. But facts don't bend, Olivia. And neither do legally binding documents. I nodded, trying to absorb everything. But as I left his office and stepped onto Main Street, the weight settled heavier on my shoulders. Towns like Fairhaven didn't thrive on facts. They thrived on narratives, especially ones told loudly and confidently by people who believed they deserved everything they desired. On the drive home, my phone lit up with new messages. I didn't answer, but I read enough previews to know where things were headed. Mom, your Aunt Linda clearly remembers Grandpa mentioning shared land. Dad, you're causing division. This isn't how families operate. Aubrey, you embarrassed me at the wedding. Now you're doing it again. Mom, why can't you just cooperate, Aubrey? Don't make me the enemy. Don't make me the enemy. I nearly laughed. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I felt wrung out. The sun was dipping behind the trees, the shadows long and soft. I walked inside and dropped my keys onto the table, listening to them clatter across the wood. Then another message came through, this one from someone I didn't expect, my Aunt Margaret. The one who had always treated both daughters equally even when my parents didn't. Liv, she wrote, they told everyone you're refusing to honor Grandpa's wishes. But I remember what he actually said. He trusted you, not them. I stared at the message for a long moment. Relief, gratitude, sadness. Then a second message. They think you'll cave because you always have. I exhaled slowly, letting those words settle inside me. Not as insult, but as truth I no longer intended to live by. I walked to the back door, stepped onto the porch, and let my eyes roam over the acres of land stretching toward the horizon. The pine trees swayed as if whispering encouragement. The creek sparkled faintly in the fading light. Last night at the wedding, surrounded by hundreds of eyes, I'd felt so small, humiliated, disposable. But here on Grandpa's land, I felt grounded, rooted, certain. They're wrong, I whispered again. But this time, the land heard me. The wind heard me. And for the first time, I believed it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, listening to the house settle around me, each creak and sigh threading itself into the churn of thoughts I couldn't quiet. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the glossy investor plans my land carved into phases, lots projected revenue streams. I saw Aubrey's face at the wedding triumphant even as she feigned distress. I heard my father's voice telling me, as if reciting a fact from a textbook, the land was always meant for the family. But beneath all that noise, something steadier pulsed Grandpa's voice. His hand warm over mine as he traced the shape of the boundary lines. His whispered promise that the land would always have meaning if I cared for it. His last days when he reached for me, even in sleep, trusting me to carry his story forward. I finally got up around 5, pulled on jeans and boots, and walked outside. The sun hadn't risen yet. Everything was washed in blue-gray light. The air smelled like damp pine, the kind of cold that wakes you down to the marrow. I grabbed my thermos of coffee and headed toward the old trail that led to the West Ridge. I'd walked that trail with Grandpa more times than I could count. He always said the ridge was the thinking place, the spot where the world sorted itself out if you were patient enough to let it. So I went there now hoping for clarity, or at least enough quiet to hear my own mind again. The forest greeted me the way it always did, with soft rustling distant bird calls, the occasional snap of a twig beneath my boots. When I reached the ridge, the first sliver of sun broke through the clouds, casting a pale gold line across the valley. I took a deep breath, letting the cold air expand my lungs. "Grandpa," I whispered into the breeze, "I don't know what to do." Of course he didn't answer, but the land did. A squirrel skittered across a fallen branch. The wind shifted through the trees, brushing against my jacket. Somewhere above me, a hawk cried out. I sipped the coffee and let myself imagine a future where the ridge remained unchanged, untouched by bulldozers, free from cabins and manicured paths, alive in its own wild rhythm. Then I imagined the alternative: noise, construction, perfect little walkways replacing moss-covered stones, investors touring the grounds with clipboards and cameras, my grandfather's legacy turning into a branded commodity. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't let it happen. I stayed there until the sun rose, fully warming the frost from the grass. Then I walked home with a new sense of purpose humming beneath my ribs, which is why when I saw the line of cars parked outside my house, I didn't freeze this time. A sleek silver SUV, a rental Jeep, my parents' sedan, and Aubrey's car glittering and polished like it had never once seen a gravel road. They were waiting for me. I stopped at the edge of the yard. My heart thudded hard, but not with fear. Something sharper, steadier. Dad stepped forward, first hands clasped behind him like he was preparing to negotiate a business merger, not speak to his daughter. "Olivia," he said, "we need to talk." Mom stood next to him, and the expression on her face, tight lips, watery eyes, made my stomach twist. Not because she was hurt, but because I knew that look well. It was the one she wore whenever she wanted something, but didn't want the responsibility of saying it outright. And Aubrey? She was leaning against her car door, arms crossed, eyes fixed on me with a mix of irritation and triumph, like she expected this confrontation to end with her getting exactly what she wanted. I walked closer, stopping a few feet away. Dad cleared his throat. "We didn't appreciate you hanging up on us yesterday." I almost laughed. "That's what you want to open with?" He stiffened. "We're trying to have a civil conversation." "So have one," I said. He exchanged a glance with Mom before continuing. "Your mother and I have discussed the issue, and your sister's business plan is solid. We believe the land would be best utilized for the retreat. And we're confident," Mom added quickly, "that Grandpa would agree if he were here." Aubrey nodded, pushing herself upright. "Exactly. This is what he would have wanted, something the whole family benefits from, not some isolated little nature sanctuary you visit on weekends." My jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about what Grandpa wanted." "Yes, I do," she snapped. "He loved us both, equally." "You weren't there," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts. "You didn't care for him at the end. You didn't listen to him. You didn't see what mattered to him." Aubrey's eyes flashed. "Oh, here we go again, playing the martyr because you changed his bandages and sat beside him." "That doesn't give you the right to hoard the land." "Hoard," I whispered. "That's what you think this is." Dad raised both hands, as if he could physically push the tension back. "Let's be rational. You can't maintain 32 acres by yourself. It's wasteful, and frankly impractical. And dangerous," Mom added. "You're always alone out there. What if something happens? You need to think about your future, too. My future. They always invoked it when they wanted control." "You're not listening," I said quietly. "Grandpa left the land to me. It was his decision. His right." Dad's jaw clenched. "We're not disputing the legality. We're talking about what's ethical." Ethical? Coming from the man who had already signed investor agreements without my knowledge. I took a slow breath. "What exactly did you come here for?" Aubrey stepped forward, her voice sharp. "The deed. Dad said you'd sign if we talked in person." I stared at her, then at Dad. "I never said that." You implied it when you didn't answer clearly, Mom said. I hung up, I replied. That's not implication. That's a boundary. Aubrey's lips curled. Well, your boundary is screwing up everything I've worked for. What you've worked for, I asked incredulously. You've already pitched a retreat on land you don't own. That's temporary, she argued, because you're going to do the right thing. I took a step back and let the words settle between us. The right thing. Their right thing. Their outcome. Their entitlement. You've all decided the land is yours, I said. But you're wrong. Dad exhaled hard frustration cracking through his composure. Stop being stubborn. Just give us the deed. No, I said. Aubrey's face flushed with anger. Olivia, stop it. You're ruining my life. No, I repeated firmer. Mom's voice wobbled. Please, for once can't you just cooperate? Think of your sister's future. My sister's future, I echoed. Not mine, not Grandpa's wishes, not the land, just hers. I looked at each of them, really looked, and something inside me shifted so completely that I felt it in my bones. For the first time in my life, I saw the truth without flinching. They didn't love me unconditionally. They didn't value me equally. They didn't even see me. They saw what I could provide. Free labor, free emotional support, free land. Dad stepped toward me. Olivia, this is your last chance to be part of this family conversation. Sign the papers. I felt the words rising before I even knew I was speaking them. I'm not signing anything. Not today. Not ever. Aubrey blinked, stunned. You can't mean that. I do, I said quietly. Dad's voice dropped into the tone he reserved for final decisions. If you walk away from this, don't expect us to keep trying. The threat hung in the cold morning air. Something inside me softened, not with fear, but with release. I nodded once, then stopped trying. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Aubrey sputtered something I didn't hear. Dad's face went rigid. I stepped back again, letting the space widen between us. And then I turned away. I walked into my house, closed the door, and leaned against it while my whole body trembled, not from dread, but from the sheer enormity of choosing myself for the first time. Outside, I could hear their voices rising, angry, resentful, disbelieving. But I didn't open the door. Not this time. Not ever again for a conversation like that. I went to my desk, pulled out Grandpa's map, and whispered to the man who taught me everything I knew about courage, I'm protecting it. I promise. My phone buzzed on the table. I didn't look at the screen. I already knew whose names would be lighting up. And I already knew I wouldn't answer. The rain started around midnight, soft at first, then steadily louder until the house seemed to breathe with the storm. I lay awake listening to it, staring at the ceiling, while the argument replayed in my mind. My father's demand. My mother's trembling plea. Aubrey's fury barely disguised as entitlement. By the time dawn broke through the clouds, my pillow was damp at the corners from tears I didn't remember shedding. I got up, brewed coffee, and sat by the window watching the forest darken and brighten with each passing gust. The land always looked different in the rain. Sharper somehow the colors, richer the bark, darker the air, thick with the scent of pine and wet soil. It felt alive in a way the rest of my world didn't. My phone blinked from the table. 27 messages sat waiting, missed calls, texts, a few voice recordings. I ignored them. I wasn't ready to hear the anger I knew waited inside those tiny digital files. Instead, I reached for the folder of documents Harlan had given me. Intent to donate. The words themselves steadied me. They didn't commit me fully, not yet, but they set a legal boundary my family couldn't bulldoze. It was a temporary protection, a declaration that the land was not theirs to claim or manipulate. I opened the form again, tracing the lines where my signature would go. A simple act, really. Ink on paper. But the impact would ripple through every relationship I'd ever had. A knock on the door made me jump. For a moment I thought it was my parents again or Aubrey ready for round 2. But when I opened the door, it was Mrs. Hanover from next door, bundled in a slick yellow raincoat, holding a container of homemade muffins. "Morning, dear," she said, pushing the container toward me. "You look like you haven't slept." I stepped aside so she could come in. She'd known me since I was 5. She had watched Grandpa's health decline with me dropping by with soups and blankets on the worst days. I heard cars outside yesterday, she said gently when we sat at the kitchen table. Loud voices. Family trouble. I closed my eyes for a moment, my throat tightening. They want my land. Of course they do, she said immediately without surprise. People show their true colors around inheritance. It's more than inheritance, I whispered. It's like they think I'm wrong for even wanting it. Mrs. Hanover gave a small, fierce nod. Because you're the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who doesn't fight back. They expect you to bend. Something in my chest loosened. I didn't bend this time. Good, she leaned forward. Because that land was your grandfather's heart, and he left it to the one who shared his heartbeat. My eyes prickled. It feels like I'm losing them. Dear, she said softly, touching my hand, you're losing people who only loved you when you said yes. A silence stretched between us, warm grounding. Then she added, Stand firm, Olivia. They don't get to claim what wasn't given to them. After she left, I stood by the window again, letting her words settle into my bones. Outside, the rain slowed to a mist, leaving droplets clinging to the branches like tiny beads of light. The land looked at peace, even if I wasn't. The phone vibrated again. A new message, from an unknown number. I pressed play. A man's voice spoke smooth, confident, practiced. Hello, Olivia. My name is Conrad Bishop. I'm the lead investor on your sister's wellness retreat proposal. Your parents suggested I reach out. We'd like to meet with you to discuss your contribution and finalize agreements on the land. Contribution. Finalize. My jaw tightened. Another message came through instantly. Same voice. Your family tells us you're hesitant. That's understandable. But this project is a major opportunity. You stand to benefit financially, of course, but more importantly, your family's name will be part of something expansive, prestigious. Don't throw that away. I deleted both messages without replying, but the knot in my stomach grew tighter. My sister hadn't just told investors the land was available, she had already positioned me as a silent, cooperative participant. I walked out to the backyard, the damp earth soft beneath my boots. A flock of crows scattered as I approached the tree line, their wings beating loud against the quiet. The land would not survive what Aubrey planned. I knew it. Grandpa knew it, and my family would stop at nothing now that investors were involved. Pressure was coming from every angle, and the truth hit me with sudden force. I needed protection. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today. I dialed Harlan. He answered on the second ring. Olivia. They're involving investors, I said without greeting. They've told them I'm contributing the land. Investors are contacting me directly. He inhaled sharply. Then you need to file the intent to donate immediately. I'm scared, I whispered, surprising myself with the rawness of it. I know, he said. But you're doing what your grandfather trusted you to do. And legally, this protects you while you decide your next steps. I swallowed. Can we file it today? Yes, he said. Come by the office. I'll have the documents ready. I hesitated before asking, what happens after I file it? It sends a clear message, he said. The land is not available. You are not to be pressured. Any development discussions become irrelevant. And my family. That, he said gently, is another conversation entirely. I ended the call and stood for a moment beneath the dripping trees. Rainwater fell from the branches onto my jacket, cold but strangely comforting. A grounding sensation, like the land was reminding me I was not alone in this. I turned to head back toward the house and froze when I saw a car pulling into my driveway. Aubrey. She stepped out before the engine even shut off, hair perfectly curled despite the rain, eyes blazing with frantic determination. Liv, she shouted, slamming the car door. Why aren't you answering your phone? I didn't move. I don't owe you an answer. She stalked toward me, heels sinking into the wet ground. You're being ridiculous. Investors are nervous. Dad is furious. Mom is crying. This is spiraling, and it's all because you're refusing to cooperate." "I'm not refusing," I said. "I'm choosing. Choosing what she demanded. To ruin my future." "Your future," I echoed softly. "Not ours. Not mine. Yours." Aubrey looked genuinely stunned for a moment, as if the idea of someone refusing her had never fully occurred to her. "You're selfish," she said finally. "Grandpa didn't raise you to be selfish." "No," I replied. "He raised me to be a steward," she scoffed. "Oh, that again." "Your little nature girl fantasy. It's land, Olivia. It's property. It's supposed to work for the family." "It's not working for you," I corrected. Her face hardened. "Fine. Then I'll make it simple. Sign the deed over, or I'll have Dad contest the will." I stared at her, rain dripping from my hair into my eyes. Contest away. She blinked. "Do you even understand what that would do to you? Do you want the whole town knowing you manipulated Grandpa when he was sick?" Anger surged, hot and sudden. "Say it again." She stepped back, caught off guard by my tone. "Say I repeated that I manipulated the only man who ever treated me like I mattered." Aubrey swallowed. The confidence thinned. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "You weren't here. You didn't feed him when he couldn't lift a spoon. You didn't bathe him when he was embarrassed to let me help. You didn't clean the blood from his knuckles when he fell on the porch. You didn't hear him whisper my name when he knew he was dying. Don't you ever suggest I took advantage of him." Aubrey's mouth opened then closed. She had nothing to say. I exhaled slowly. "I'm filing legal protection today. The land is not yours. It was never yours. And it never will be." Her eyes widened. "Legal protection." "It's over," I whispered. "Stop trying." For once she didn't argue. She didn't shout. She just turned her heels, scraping against the gravel, and got into her car. The engine revved, then faded down the road. I stood in the rain, letting the cold soften the trembling in my chest. Then I went inside to get the documents. It was time. The drive to Harlan's office felt heavier than it should have. The road was the same one I'd taken 1,000 times past the post office, the old fire station, the diner where Grandpa used to get black coffee and lemon pie. But today, each landmark felt distant, muted, like I was looking at my life from behind a pane of glass. The intent to donate document sat in the passenger seat beside me, printed neatly clipped together, and vibrating with the weight of a decision I could not take back. Rainwater still streaked across my windshield, and the wipers brushed them away in slow, steady sweeps. My chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. I wanted to feel strong. I wanted to feel righteous. I wanted to feel like the steward Grandpa believed I could be. But sitting behind that wheel on the edge of a moment that would tear open my family in ways we might never recover from, all I really felt was alone. Harlan was waiting outside his office holding a large umbrella as I pulled into one of the angled parking spots. He smiled the kind of smile that tried to be reassuring but was weighed down by 1,000 things left unsaid. "Morning," he said, stepping back so I could run under the umbrella with him. "Morning," I murmured. Inside his office smelled faintly of leather-bound books and peppermint tea. The radiator clanged gently in the corner, adding a homey crackle to the otherwise tense silence. Harlan motioned to the chair across from his desk. "Let's take it one step at a time." I sat shoulders tight, hands clasped around the folder in my lap. He took the papers gently from me, flipping through them with an experienced eye. His brows pinched as he read. "Olivia," he said softly, "you understand what this means?" "Yes, I do. This will disable any attempt to sell, subdivide, or develop the land while the intent is active." "I know. And if you follow through and complete the full donation after this period," I know I repeated, though my voice trembled slightly. "The land leaves my estate permanently. It becomes protected forever. It can't be given back." He nodded. "I need to ask the hard questions," he said gently. "It's my job. I'm not hesitating." I lifted my chin, though heat rose behind my eyes. "I just need this. I need to take the land out of their reach. "You're honoring what your grandfather trusted you to do," he said, his voice warm. "And that matters." He slid the final page in front of me, the signature line waiting like the edge of a cliff. "Once you sign," he continued, "the documents become official the moment I notarize them. I'll file the intent today." My hand hovered over the pen he offered. I thought of Grandpa's rough palm guiding mine along the bark of the old cedar. I thought of Aubrey's voice dripping with entitlement. I thought of my father's cold disappointment. I thought of my mother's tears weaponized with precision. I thought of the investors who were already circling like birds of prey. I thought of myself standing small, shrinking smaller, until finally deciding not to. I signed. Harlan placed his notary stamp, the heavy thunk echoing through the room, sealing a line that felt more like a vow than a legal formality. "It's done," he said. Something inside me loosened, then immediately constricted again. Relief braided with fear twisting like twin vines around my ribs. I swallowed. "Thank you." "You're protecting something sacred," he said. "Not everyone has the courage." Courage. I didn't feel courageous. I felt like someone who'd just thrown a stone into a pond and was waiting to see if it would ripple or explode. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. "Dad!" I didn't answer. But a second later, a voicemail appeared. "Olivia, call me, now." Then another buzz, Aubrey this time. "Call me immediately." Then Mom. "Please, Olivia, we need to talk." My chest tightened as more messages flooded in, some short, some long, some frantic, some furious. "Are you insane? You've made everything harder. Fix this. You're hurting us. You're ruining your sister's future. Undo whatever you just did." Harlan's eyes softened as he watched my expression. "Go home," he said gently. "Give yourself space. You don't owe anyone immediate explanations." I nodded, slipping the folder back into my bag. But when I stepped outside into the still drizzling air, I didn't immediately drive home. Instead, I walked to the little park across the street, the one with the wooden benches and the faded mural painted by local high schoolers. I sat beneath the gazebo listening to rain tap the roof in a syncopated rhythm. My phone vibrated again. This time I answered. Aubrey's voice came through sharp, ragged, almost panicked. "What did you do?" I didn't respond. "Dad got an alert from one of the investors," she continued. "They said the land just became legally restricted." "Restricted, Liv. Do you even know what that means for me?" "It means," I said quietly, "the land is not available. You can't do that." Her voice cracked. "You can't just take everything away." "I'm not taking anything away," I said. "I'm protecting what was never yours." "You are unbelievable," she seethed. "This is spite. This is revenge because you embarrassed yourself at my wedding." A bitter laugh escaped my throat. "You asked me to leave." "No," she snapped. "Dad asked you. Because you were making the day stressful. You know how sensitive I am. You know how big this was for me." "It was your wedding," I said. "Not your coronation." She gasped like I'd slapped her. Another voice cut in my father's loud, angry. "Olivia, you undo this immediately." "It can't be undone," I said softly. "You listen to me," he growled. "You have crossed a line. This family will not accept." I hung up. And for the first time since all of this began, I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I didn't feel small. I felt steady. The rain eased. A patch of sun broke through the clouds, warming my face. I wasn't naive. I knew what was coming, the storm my family would unleash, the accusations, the twisted stories, the manipulation they'd feed anyone who would listen. But as I sat on that bench, letting the damp air dry in patches across my clothes, something like peace settled over me. Not triumph, not victory, just peace, quiet, grounding, fragile, but real. When I got home, I walked the perimeter of the land, the way Grandpa had taught me. The air smelled like wet cedar and rebirth. The creek rushed louder from the rainfall, its clear water catching sunlight between moss-covered stones. Everywhere I looked, life persisted, tiny ferns uncurling a woodpecker, tapping at a trunk, mushrooms dotting the dark soil. The land didn't care about drama. It didn't care about investors. It didn't care about entitlement manipulation or guilt. It cared only about being protected. By the time dusk settled in, my phone had filled with more messages, some angry, some frantic, some laced with guilt, some dripping with promises they'd never kept. I read none of them. Instead, I stood at the old cedar, Grandpa loved most, placing my palm flat against its rough bark. "I did it," I whispered. "I kept my promise." The wind brushed against me, bending through the trees like the gentlest affirmation. And standing there beneath the fading light, I realized something I hadn't been brave enough to admit until now. Protecting the land wasn't just about honoring Grandpa. It was about finally honoring myself. The storm inside my phone grew louder over the next 48 hours. Calls came in thick waves, angry, pleading, manipulative, sometimes all three in the same voicemail. My mother's trembling voice, my father's barked orders, Aubrey's frantic sobbing that always dissolved into rage. I listened to none of it. I left my phone on silent screen, down like a venomous thing that might strike if I got too close. On the third morning, my doorbell rang. I hadn't been expecting anyone. No one had stopped by unannounced since Grandpa's funeral. I wiped my hands on a towel they'd been in the sink washing dishes I hadn't realized I was rewashing, and opened the door. A man in a charcoal suit stood on my porch holding a leather folio. Rain beaded on his shoulders. His hair was neat, dark, and business clean. "Ms. Hale?" he asked. My grip tightened on the doorknob. "Who's asking?" He gave a polished smile. "I'm Tyler Granger. I represent Bishop and Whitcomb Investments. I believe you've spoken with Mr. Conrad Bishop." My pulse thudded once hard. I hadn't spoken, I'd deleted his messages, but clearly that didn't matter. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "If you have a moment," he said, glancing around as if the pines themselves might overhear, "I'd appreciate an opportunity to clarify a few things regarding your sister's business venture." "I'm not interested." He didn't flinch. "I understand your hesitation. There's been confusion, tension. But I assure you, Ms. Hale, we simply want to resolve matters professionally." Professionally. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. 5 minutes, he added, sensing my refusal. That's all. Maybe I should have slammed the door. Maybe I should have told him to take his polished smile and walk back down my gravel drive before his shoes sank into the mud. But something nudged at me, curiosity maybe, or the faint suspicion that if I didn't hear what he had to say, they'd spin it anyway. So I stepped aside. He entered, carefully scanning the house with the subtle interest of someone trained to assess a person's financial worth by their furniture. I gestured toward the kitchen table, and he sat with a gentle fold of his suit jacket. "Ms. Hale," he began smoothly, "I want to assure you that we respect family dynamics. We realize things may have been communicated to you prematurely." "Prematurely," I repeated. "Your parents and sister?" He said, choosing his words with precision, were enthusiastic about the retreat concept. In their excitement, they may have given the impression that formal agreements had been reached. Ah, so this wasn't an apology. It was damage control. "They listed my land in your pitch deck," I said flatly. "Yes," he acknowledged, "under the assumption based on their insistence that the property was a shared family asset. It isn't. So we now understand. Now." Meaning they'd only bothered to learn the truth when my intent to donate blocked their path. "Ms. Hale?" He continued, leaning forward with a practiced air of empathy. "This venture is a significant financial opportunity. Your sister's role isn't frivolous, she has genuine business potential. With your cooperation, this could bring your family closer, generate revenue, even elevate your own standing in the process." "My standing doesn't need elevating," I replied. He paused, then softened his tone further. "If the land is the concern, we can structure compensation. You'd receive a percentage of profits, a meaningful percentage. I'm not selling it," I said. He blinked, recalculating. "We can negotiate control clauses. You'd retain ownership of the acreage while we—" "No," I said again. He exhaled, his expression still polite but no longer warm. "Ms. Hale, forgive my candor, but your family has made commitments. Investors have expectations. Undoing those expectations is not without cost. Emotional cost. Financial cost. So you're here to pressure me. I'm here to prevent unnecessary conflict. I sat back, letting silence settle between us. He shifted the slightest movement, but it told me everything. He wasn't used to being told no. He wasn't used to standing in kitchens with mismatched chairs and peeling paint, while the person across from him refused to step into the power dynamic he understood. I folded my hands on the table. The land stays as it is, I said. No deals, no retreats, no negotiations. He closed the folio gently like a doctor preparing bad news. In that case, he said, rising, I need to inform you that this matter will escalate. I met his gaze. Against who, me or the people who promised you something they never owned? Something flickered in his eyes, annoyance maybe. Then he straightened his tie, cleared his throat, and forced a polite smile. We'll be in touch. I walked him to the door. Rain had begun again, a soft patter on the steps. He hesitated as he stepped outside. Ms. Hale, he added, voice lower, families don't always recover from disputes like this. My family started this dispute, I said. I'm just ending it. He said nothing more and walked toward his waiting car. When the taillights disappeared down the road, I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My whole body felt tight, electric braced for something I couldn't yet name. I sat at the table again, staring at the empty space where that folio had been. The kitchen felt smaller now, like the walls were pressing inward with the weight of it all. Then my phone lit up. One message. From Dad. Did you speak to Bishop's representative? We need to discuss your next steps as a family. Next steps. As a family. The irony nearly choked me. Before I could decide whether to ignore it, another message came in. Mom, Tyler said you were unreasonable. Please, Olivia. You're breaking your sister's heart. A third. Aubrey, I cannot believe you embarrassed me again. Fix this. Fix it, or I swear I closed the messages before the threats could finish forming. I stood up abruptly, grabbed my coat, and walked outside. The rain met me with cool pinpricks against my skin. I headed toward the woods not to escape, but to tether myself back to something real. Mud clung to my boots. The forest hummed softly, alive with dripping branches and wind weaving through the pines. With each step, the voices in my phone faded. My parents, investors, Aubrey. Out here, none of them mattered. I reached the old cedar, the one Grandpa always called the Sentinel. He used to place his palm on its trunk and say, "This tree knows the truth before the people do." So I placed my hand there now, letting the rough bark bite gently into my palm. I'm scared, I whispered into the storm-soaked air. But I won't give up the land. Not for them. Not for anyone. The wind pushed against me strong enough that I leaned into it without falling. For a moment, I imagined it was an answer. When I returned home, soaked through the answering machine, light was blinking. I pressed play. Mom's voice filled the room, thin, trembling, weaponizing vulnerability the way she always had. Olivia, honey. What are you doing? Everyone is talking. The investors are furious. Aubrey can't stop crying. You're humiliating us. Please, stop this. Beep. Dad's turn, anger barely contained. You've gone too far. Undo the filing. We can still salvage this if you apologize and cooperate. Beep. Aubrey's voice cracked with fury. You ruined everything, everything. Do you even care what this does to me, Beep? Silence. Then a fourth message began, unexpectedly soft. This one came from my Aunt Margaret. Liv, I heard about the protective filing. I just want you to know something. Your grandfather told me years ago that he left the land to the one who listened, the one who understood him. That was you, not them. Hold your ground, sweetheart. The land will thank you. My breath hitched. I sank into the nearest chair, emotions rising up like a tide, fear, relief, sadness, defiance, all colliding in one overwhelming rush. I wasn't alone. Someone remembered the truth. Someone saw me. As the rain continued tapping softly against the windows, I realized something profound. My family might never forgive me. The investors might push harder. The town might start whispering. Everything could get much worse. But the land was safe for now, and I was standing finally in my own truth. And for the first time since the wedding, I felt a small flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Strength, not loud, not fiery, but steady. Steady enough to hold the line. I woke the next morning to a house that felt too quiet, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The storm clouds had cleared, leaving the world washed and bright, but inside me the tension still pulsed, low, steady, unyielding. I made coffee, wrapped my hands around the mug for warmth, and walked to the window overlooking the east meadow. Sunlight stretched across the tall grass, turning each dewdrop into a tiny prism. The land looked untouched, unbothered, unconcerned with the chaos swirling in my life. Maybe that was why Grandpa loved it so fiercely it never asked for anything except to be left alone. But the peace didn't last long. Around 10, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown local number. I almost ignored it, but something nudged me to answer. "Hello," I said cautiously. "Olivia. This is Deputy Carl from the county sheriff's office." My stomach dropped. "Is everything okay?" He hesitated before continuing. "We received a request from your parents to conduct a wellness check. They said you're acting erratically and may be a danger to yourself." For a moment, the world tilted. "What? It's standard procedure," he said quickly. "I'm calling before sending anyone out. I've known your family a long time, so I thought I'd check with you first." My chest tightened, air thinning. "I'm not a danger to myself. I'm not acting erratically." "I didn't think so," he said gently. "But your parents insisted you weren't answering their calls and were making concerning decisions." A bitter laugh escaped me. "My concerning decisions are about land. They're angry that I won't sign it over to them." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. "That's not what they described." "Of course not," I whispered. "A wellness check." They were now trying to paint me as unstable. "What do I do?" I asked. "Well," he said cautiously, "legally, if they push, we have to at least send someone to confirm you're safe. But they can't force an evaluation without clear evidence of harm. If you answer the door and speak coherently, that's it." Case closed. "So they're weaponizing concern." "Families do that sometimes," he said carefully. "But listen, if I were you, I'd document everything you're dealing with, just in case it escalates." When the call ended, I leaned both hands on the counter and stared at the floor until my vision steadied. My parents had crossed lines before, but this was something darker. Something calculated. Something meant not just to pressure me, but to discredit me. I reached for my phone hands, trembling now from anger rather than fear, and texted Harlan. "My parents requested a wellness check. They're saying I'm unstable. What do I do?" He responded immediately. "I'm coming over." I put on shoes, pulled my hair back, and stepped onto the porch just as his dark blue sedan pulled up. He walked toward me with a frown carved deep into his forehead. "They're escalating," he said. "I know." We went inside and I poured coffee for both of us. When we sat down, he folded his hands over the table. "Let me be blunt," he said. "People often weaponize mental health claims when they start losing ground in inheritance disputes. It's not uncommon." "It's happening because they think I'll break," I said quietly. "They're afraid of what you just did," he corrected. "You took control, and they're trying to take it back using whatever leverage they think will work." My throat tightened. "Will this affect the intent to donate?" "No," he said firmly. "And if they try anything more extreme, I'll file a formal notice outlining their intimidation tactics." The relief that washed through me was sharp and cold. I nodded, but my pulse had not begun to calm when another car pulled into my driveway. A white crossover. Mom's. Harlan and I exchanged a glance. He stood. "You don't have to let her in." "I know." But I also knew she wouldn't leave until she got what she wanted. I opened the door before she could knock. Mom stood there with a carefully composed expression, eyes slightly red, voice, trembling, posture soft. It was the same performance she used at funerals, doctors' offices, and moments she wanted people to believe she was fragile enough to be pitied. "Oh, Olivia," she whispered, reaching for my hand. "We're so worried about you." I stepped back out of reach. "I'm fine." Her gaze flicked past me to see Harlan standing inside. Her expression stiffened. "What's he doing here? I asked him to come." She lifted her chin, a subtle shift from pitiful to prickly. "Did you know your father barely slept last night? Aubrey is hysterical. Investors are threatening legal action. And now the sheriff's office is involved, I know," I said. "You know," she repeated, stunned that I wasn't apologizing. "You brought them into this," I continued. "You called them. You told them lies about me." "It wasn't lies," she protested quickly. "You've been distant, unresponsive, making extreme decisions. Protecting land isn't extreme." She pressed a hand to her chest dramatically. "You're isolating. You're lashing out. You've always been sensitive, but this is beyond." "Stop," I said sharply. She froze. "You're not here because you're worried about me," I said. "You're here because you're worried about losing the land, losing control." Mom flinched as if slapped. "How dare you suggest? How dare you call the sheriff?" I said, my voice low, steady, cutting. "How dare you accuse me of being unstable because I won't give you something that was never yours?" She blinked, stunned into silence. Then her face crumpled into a wounded expression. "We are your parents. We deserve respect." "You taught me respect," I whispered. "But never boundaries." She gripped the doorframe. "Olivia, if you don't undo that filing, you will destroy this family." "No," I said. "The family started destroying itself when you decided Aubrey's success mattered more than honesty, more than Grandpa's wishes, more than me." Her mouth tightened. "So this is revenge." "No," I said. "This is self-preservation." She stared at me, eyes narrowing inch by inch, her facade cracking piece by piece. "I don't recognize you anymore," she whispered. "You never truly saw me," I replied. A long moment passed between us, the kind of silence that feels like an ending rather than a pause. Finally she straightened, wiped her eyes, and stepped back from the doorway. "If you won't be reasonable," she said quietly, "then we'll do what we must." She walked to her car, opened the door, then paused to deliver the final blow. "You chose this, Olivia, not us." She drove away. I closed the door gently, though my hands trembled. Harlan stood in the middle of the room with a solemn expression. "They're preparing for a fight." "I know," I whispered. "Are you prepared too?" I lifted my chin. I filed the intent. I took the first step. "I'm not backing down." He nodded. "Then they can't take the land, no matter what noise they make." After he left, I walked to the porch and sat on the steps, letting the sun warm my face. The forest whispered softly, leaves rustling in a breeze that smelled like pine sap and damp earth. Something inside me softened, then strengthened like a tree trunk cracking open to reveal new rings of growth. They could call the sheriff. They could call investors. They could twist stories. They could cry, threaten, manipulate. But they couldn't undo my decision. They couldn't take Grandpa's land. They couldn't rewrite the truth I lived. For the rest of the day, I worked the garden, pruned branches, cleaned tools, ordinary tasks grounding me in ways no conversation could. By the time the sun dipped behind the mountains, the air cooling into a soft evening hush, my body ached, but my mind felt clearer. When I finally checked my phone, one new voicemail waited. The caller ID didn't show my parents' number. Or Aubrey's. It was Conrad Bishop. I hit play, "Ms. Hale." His voice began calm, but taut with frustration. "It appears you've created a legal obstacle to our development timeline. I assure you this will have consequences. We are prepared to pursue remedies if you do not reconsider." A pause. "Your family is deeply concerned. As am I." Another pause, colder this time. "Call me." I deleted it without saving. Then I stared out into the darkening land, listening to the distant call of an owl, and whispered the same truth I'd repeated at the cedar tree. They're wrong if they think I'll give in. And the land, steady and ancient, whispered back in its own way, You didn't come this far to break now. The days that followed felt strangely quiet, like the eye of a storm. Not peaceful, never peaceful, but suspended. My parents stopped calling. Aubrey stopped texting. Even the investors who had pushed so hard only a few days earlier seemed to vanish from the edges of my life. My phone barely buzzed anymore, and the absence of noise left a hollow ache behind my ribs. But I knew better than to mistake silence for surrender. People like my family didn't give up. They regrouped. On the fourth morning of that uneasy calm, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address. My name handwritten in a familiar curl. Aubrey's handwriting. I almost threw it away, almost left it unopened on the table. But something in me, maybe exhaustion, maybe morbid curiosity, compelled me to break the seal. Inside was a single sheet of stationery with lavender borders, the kind she used for thank you notes and bridal shower invitations. Her message was short. Olivia, we need to meet. Alone, please, for the sake of our relationship. I'll be at the old picnic clearing at noon tomorrow. A. I held the letter between my fingers, waiting for the ink to shift, for the words to mean something different. But no, the script was soft, pleading, a version of Aubrey she almost never showed me. Did she want reconciliation, manipulation? A final attempt to sway me, I couldn't know, but I knew where she wanted to meet. The old clearing, the one Grandpa called the listening meadow, the one where we held birthday picnics and played tag when we were small, the one he took us to the day Dad yelled at him for refusing to sell the land to a developer. Land listens, he'd said as we sat beneath the oak. It knows who protects it. The memory made my throat tighten. Maybe that was why Aubrey chose that place, because she knew I wouldn't ignore the significance. Or maybe she didn't think about it at all. Maybe it was simply her turn to weaponize nostalgia the way she weaponized everything else. Either way, I would go, not for her, but because I wanted to hear the truth from her lips, what she thought she was owed, what she thought I should sacrifice, what story she had convinced herself made sense. And I wanted her to hear the truth from mine. The next day, I left early, walking the winding trail toward the meadow. The air was cool, crisp, with the scent of morning dew. Little birds hopped between branches overhead, singing their soft, scattered songs. The deeper I walked, the quieter the world became. When I reached the clearing, Aubrey was already there. She sat on the old fallen log near the center, the one Grandpa had once carved initials into. She was dressed in a soft cream sweater and pressed jeans hair, styled perfectly, makeup subtle but deliberate. It was a curated version of vulnerability. She didn't turn when she heard me approach, though her shoulders stiffened slightly. "You came," she said quietly. "You asked," I replied. She looked up, her blue eyes rimmed with dark circles. "We used to come here all the time," she said, voice soft. "Remember, yes. We'd lay on the grass and count clouds." "Yes." "And Grandpa would make those silly animal shapes and pretend the land was talking to him." A faint smile touched her lips. "I never understood that." "I did," I said. She looked at me fully then, and whatever she saw in my face made her expression tighten. "I didn't ask you here to fight." "Good," I said. "I didn't come here to be manipulated." She winced, her mask slipping for a moment. "Is that really what you think of me?" 100%, I said. Silence fell between us, heavy fraying at the edges. She shifted slightly on the log. "Olivia," she said finally, "you hurt me." Those 3 words held an entire childhood's worth of twisted truth. How I asked. You took something from me, something I thought I would have. The land was never yours. "It should have been," she burst out, voice cracking. "Dad always said we'd share everything one day. He always said the land was for the whole family." "Dad says a lot of things when he wants control," I replied. Her eyes darted away. I continued. "Grandpa chose me. He made a decision. He signed a will. He trusted me. You can rewrite the story to make yourself feel better, but it won't make it true." Tears welled in her eyes, surprising me. You were always his favorite, she whispered. That hit harder than I expected. No, I said softly. I was simply present. She flinched again, another small sharp crack in her persona. I didn't get to be present, she said. Dad needed me, Mom needed me. You had Grandpa. I blinked, startled. That wasn't the narrative she usually told, spoiled, adored, always the center of every room. You think they needed you? I asked. Her voice broke. I think they wanted me to be perfect. So I tried. I did everything right. I made myself into what they wanted. Don't you see Aubrey the shining star? Aubrey the achiever? Aubrey who never disappointed. The pain in her voice felt real. Raw. Almost childlike. I inhaled slowly. And you think the land will make you whole? She swallowed. It's the first thing I've been excited about in years. I thought if the retreat succeeded, they'd finally be proud of me. Really proud. Not just pretending. My heart ached for her for the ways pressure had molded her into something brittle and desperate. But sympathy didn't erase truth. Aubrey, I said gently, that land can't fix what's broken between you and our parents. She shook her head fiercely. You don't get it. You've always had something that made you special. Grandpa loved you more. Grandpa loved us differently, I said quietly. He understood me. You overwhelmed him, but he admired your ambition. Her tears spilled over. I'm not ambitious, she whispered. I'm terrified. Terrified of disappointing them. Terrified of being ordinary. Terrified of failing. Her voice broke on the last word. I stepped closer, lowering myself onto the log beside her. You're not failing, I said softly. You're drowning in expectations that were never meant for you. She pressed her hands to her face, shoulders shaking. I let her cry. The meadow held us both in its quiet space. Pine needles rustling underfoot, the sky opening above us like a sanctuary. When she finally spoke again, her voice was small. Can't you just give me the land, Liv? Just this one thing. Please. I sighed, heavy aching. No. She looked at me with pure devastation. Why not? Because it isn't just land, I said. It's a promise, a responsibility, a legacy 3 generations built with their hands and their sacrifices. It's not meant to be a spa, or an investment, or a bargaining chip. It's meant to stay whole. But I need it, she whispered. No, I said softly. You want it. That's different. Her face hardened, tears drying into brittle anger. Then you're choosing the land over me. I'm choosing integrity, I said, and boundaries, and honoring the one person who ever saw me. She stood abruptly, wiping her cheeks. If you go through with this donation, she said, voice trembling with fury and heartbreak, you'll lose us. I met her gaze without flinching. I already lost you when Dad told me to leave your wedding. She inhaled sharply as if slapped. I didn't ask him to do that, she said. But you didn't stop him, I replied. The silence thickened. She broke eye contact first. Fine, she whispered. Do what you want. Just don't expect forgiveness when this is over. She turned and walked down the trail, her figure growing smaller between the trees until the forest swallowed her completely. I sat on the log long after she disappeared, listening to the meadow breathe, feeling the ache settle into something deeper, more permanent. When I finally rose and pressed my palm to the old oak, I spoke into the quiet. She made her choice, and so did I. A breeze stirred the branches, scattering leaves at my feet like an answer. I walked home slowly, aware that nothing about this conversation had fixed anything. It had only confirmed how far the cracks in our family ran, deep, ancient, spreading farther than any of us ever admitted. But it had also given me something unexpected: clarity. Aubrey wasn't evil. She wasn't even cruel. She was broken in the shape our parents built. But I wouldn't let that brokenness rip apart the one thing Grandpa trusted me to protect. Not for guilt, not for love, not for fear of being alone. The land was mine to guard, and I would guard it even if it meant guarding it alone. I woke the next morning knowing something had shifted. Not outside there, the world was its usual stillness, the land resting beneath soft sunlight, but inside, something in me felt braced, fortified, but also wound tight like a wire stretched to its limit. I made tea instead of coffee, craving warmth that didn't jolt my nerves, and stood at the kitchen window watching a pair of deer cross the lower path. Peaceful, unaware that human hands were fighting over the soil beneath their feet. My phone was on the table screen down silent, but I knew messages waited. I could feel the weight of them in the air. When I finally picked it up, there were 17 missed calls from my father, 5 from my mother, 3 from Aubrey, 2 from unknown numbers, and 1 voicemail from Dad marked urgent. I deleted it without listening. Instead, I stepped outside, letting the cool air hit my cheeks. The land felt steadier than I did, humming with the quiet rhythm of morning. I walked toward the barn Grandpa built by hand, its old boards weathered but strong. Just being near it steadied me. I was halfway through checking the tools when I heard gravel crunch under tires. A car was pulling into my driveway. I froze. For a moment I prayed it would be Harlan, or Mrs. Hanover, anyone whose presence didn't immediately fill my lungs with dread. But the car that rolled to a stop was unfamiliar, a black sedan with tinted windows. And when the door opened, my heart sank. Dad stepped out first, stiff and unreadable in one of his pressed jackets. Mom climbed out behind him, her face pale and serious. And then from the back seat, Aubrey. Her expression was something between defiance and exhaustion, her chin lifted, but her eyes carrying bruised shadows that hadn't been there before. I stood still as they approached. The 3 of them together looked like a wall forming a united front. Dad didn't wait for pleasantries. "We need to speak," he said. "I don't recall inviting you," I replied. "We're your family," he said sharply. "We shouldn't need an invitation. We should," I said evenly. "But that's how boundaries work." Mom stepped forward, wringing her hands. "Olivia, please, let's not start this with anger." "Then don't open with entitlement," I said. A flicker of hurt crossed her face, the kind she used when she wanted sympathy more than resolution. But today it didn't work. Dad exhaled through his nose. "We're not leaving until we talk." I sighed. "Fine. But we're doing this on the porch." The 4 of us settled onto the wide wooden steps, though settled was generous. Dad perched as though sitting too long on my property might contaminate him. He opened first. "Your filing created problems," he said briskly. "Serious legal problems. Investors have paused negotiations. Aubrey's credibility is on the line. That isn't my responsibility." "You made it your responsibility when you filed that intent to donate," he snapped. "You escalated. I protected the land," I said. "You weaponized it." The accusation hit harder than expected. Weaponized Dad, I fulfilled Grandpa's wishes. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "No, you used his memory as a shield." Mom touched his arm. "Please don't say it like that." "No, Margaret," he said, shaking her off. "She needs to hear it." "Olivia, you're clinging to a dead man's sentimentality because you're afraid of change." The words stabbed sharp cold. I breathed slowly. "Change that destroys a legacy is not change. It's erasure. You're exaggerating," he said. "The retreat would bring prosperity to the family. Aubrey is the family." The look on his face told me everything. He didn't answer. Aubrey finally spoke, her voice softer than I'd expected. "Liv, I know we argued. I know we said things we didn't mean. But Dad's right. You're holding on to something that could help all of us." "I don't want to be helped by losing everything meaningful," I said. "It's not losing," she insisted. "You'll still be part of it. A partner." "No," I said quietly. "I'd be a resource." Her jaw tightened. "You think so little of us?" "No," I replied. "I think realistically." Mom leaned closer, voice trembling. "We're begging you, Olivia. Undo the filing. Just undo it. We can work out the details later." "I can't undo it," I said. "And I won't." "You won't," Dad repeated, his tone darkening. "Because you want to punish us." I stared at him. "I spent 35 years trying to please you, trying to earn something as simple as respect. And when you finally saw a chance to benefit from something Grandpa gave me, you didn't hesitate to throw me aside." "That's not true," Mom began. "You told me to leave the wedding I cut in. Dad, you humiliated me in front of 200 people." He stood abruptly. "Because you were causing tension, I was standing by the dessert table," I said. Quietly. He faltered, just for a moment. But it was there, the truth he didn't want to face. Aubrey rubbed her arms, shivering, though the day was mild. "Liv, I didn't want you gone. I was overwhelmed. Dad thought giving me space would help." "You smiled," I said. "When I walked out, you smiled." She blinked rapidly. "I was nervous. You wanted me gone," I said, "because you thought everything would be easier without me." Her silence spoke louder than anything. Dad leaned over me, voice low and controlled. "Your actions are tearing this family apart." "No," I said. "Your entitlement is." Mom began to cry then. Not the sharp tears of anger, but slow, deliberate tears, meant to sway, to soften, to return power to her side. "Please," she whispered. "We'll lose everything if you don't cooperate. Aubrey's wedding is already being talked about. People are saying you ruined." I laughed softly. "Let them talk." Dad's eyes flashed. "You're being vindictive." "I'm being honest," I said. For the first time in years. The wind brushed through the trees, scattering pine needles across the steps. For a moment, the world felt painfully still. Then I said what I came here to say. I filed the intent. The land is protected for now. And in 30 days, I'm donating it permanently. Mom gasped. Aubrey's face paled. Dad's expression hardened into something almost unfamiliar. "You wouldn't," Mom whispered. "I would," I said. Dad took a step back, studying me like he'd never seen me before. "You'd give away your inheritance just to spite us." "No," I said softly. "To honor Grandpa. To honor myself. Because the moment you tried to take the land, you revealed who you were willing to sacrifice to get what you wanted." Aubrey stood suddenly, her breath hitching. "Liv, please, don't do this. If you take the land away forever, you'll survive," I said. "You always do." Her voice cracked. "Not this time. It's not my job to fix that," I replied. Dad's tone dropped to a cold, dangerous whisper. "If you go through with this, you're no longer part of this family." My heart twisted, a physical wrenching. But clarity washed over me next. "I wasn't part of it at the wedding," I said. "And apparently not in your plans for the land, so tell me, what exactly am I losing?" None of them answered. A full minute passed before Dad finally straightened. "We're done here." Mom sobbed harder. Aubrey turned her face away, streaks of mascara sliding down her cheeks. They walked to the car in silence. But before climbing in, Aubrey looked back at me with eyes full of something unapologetically raw: anger, grief, humiliation. "You're choosing dirt over us." I held her gaze. "I'm choosing truth." She shut the door. The car rolled away slowly, dust rising behind it like the smoke of something burned down to ash. I stood on the porch long after they were gone, hands trembling, throat tight, heart aching in a way I didn't have words for. Protecting the land had cost me something more than soil or trees or property lines. It had cost me illusions. It had cost me denial. It had cost me the version of family I had begged for my whole life. But as the silence settled, something else rose to fill the space they left behind: resolve. I went to the barn, found Grandpa's old compass in the drawer, and traced my thumb along its worn brass edges. "I hear you," I whispered to the land. And for the first time since the wedding, the ache inside me eased. Not healed, not gone, but eased. Enough to know I wasn't turning back. The morning I signed the final donation papers, the world felt unnervingly calm. The sky was a muted blue, the kind that settles in without announcement, neither bright nor gloomy, just steady. The air carried a sharpness that hinted at early autumn, and the land felt alert beneath it, as if it knew what was coming. I woke earlier than usual, long before sunrise, and made tea instead of coffee. My hands trembled a little as I poured the water, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. Today wasn't just a formality. Today was a turning point, one I'd feel for years, maybe the rest of my life. I walked outside barefoot, the earth cold under my soles. The forest greeted me with soft sounds, the creak of branches, the distant call of a morning bird, the faint rush of the creek far beyond the ridge. I breathed it in slow and deep. "This is it," I whispered to the trees. The land didn't answer in words. It answered in presence. When the sun began to rise low and golden, I went back inside and changed into clothes that felt right, worn jeans, an old flannel shirt of Grandpa's sleeves rolled up. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. By 8, I was pulling into Harlan's office parking lot. He stood outside the door waiting for me, holding a stack of folders under one arm and a warm cup of something under the other. "You ready?" he asked gently. I nodded. Ready. Inside the office felt strangely intimate sunlight catching dust motes, the radiator humming softly, papers neatly stacked on every surface. Harlan motioned for me to sit at the desk while he spread out the documents. Intent to donate was step 1, he said. This is final. Once you sign, the land becomes part of the Conservation Trust permanently. It's removed from your estate. No heirs, no relatives, no entity can ever claim it. I understand. There's no going back, I know. And you're certain? I swallowed, then nodded. This is what Grandpa wanted. And what I need to do. He studied me for a moment, then handed me the pen. My hand hovered above the signature line, steady in a way I didn't quite feel inside. I thought of Grandpa sitting on the porch, polishing that same compass I kept in my desk now. I thought of him telling me land remembers the hands that tend to it. Then I signed my name. One page, then another, then the next. Each stroke of ink felt like closing a door I'd been standing in the threshold of for too long. When I finished, Harlan pressed the notary stamp onto the final sheet. The heavy click echoed like a gavel. "It's done," he said quietly. I exhaled slowly, relief, grief, certainty, all woven together. "Thank you," he nodded. "Your grandfather would be proud. Whether your family understands this or not, you've preserved something that mattered to him, and to you." My phone buzzed, then one long vibration that rattled across the desk. I didn't need to check it to know who it was. Dad, then Mom, then Aubrey. But I didn't answer, not yet. Instead, I walked outside with the documents tucked safely inside a folder. The breeze was cool against my face, the kind of breeze that feels like a hand guiding you forward. On the drive home, my phone continued buzzing relentlessly. Calls, messages, voicemails. At one point, Aubrey sent 10 texts in a row, then stopped, then sent one more. What did you do? I didn't respond. Not until I got home. Not until I stood on the porch with the folder in my hand and the land stretching behind me like a promise fulfilled. Only then did I turn on the speakerphone, scroll to the most recent missed call from my parents, and press play. My father's voice filled the air, sharp and urgent. "Olivia, this has gone far enough. Don't make us take legal action. Call us back. Fix this before it's too late." Then my mother's voice. "Sweetheart, we love you, but you are being irrational. People are talking. The investors are furious. Aubrey can't stop crying. Please undo whatever you did today, please." And then Aubrey. "You betrayed us. You betrayed me." I hoped the message cut off. I took a long breath, then dialed Dad's number. He answered before the first ring finished. What he began, breathless. "It's done," I said. Silence. "Done," he repeated. "What do you mean done?" I signed the donation. "The land is now under permanent Conservation Trust protection. No one can touch it." The silence that followed was deeper than anything I'd ever heard from him, shocked, wounded, furious. "You didn't," he whispered. "Tell me you didn't." "I did." Another long, dangerous pause. Then he exploded. "You selfish, ungrateful," I hung up before the rest came out. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't quicken. I simply set the phone on the porch railing and looked out at the land, my land no longer but still mine in the ways that truly mattered. I walked to the big cedar tree, the sentinel, and placed my palm against its bark. "Protected," I whispered. "Just like you wanted." A wind swept through the branches, scattering needles like confetti. I smiled a deep, quiet smile that felt like sunlight breaking through months of storm. In the days that followed, my family went silent. No calls, no texts, no explanations. Just silence thick enough to feel like a wall built between us. But something unexpected shifted inside me. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt free. Free from the constant hunger for approval. Free from the weight of their expectations. Free from being the daughter who always said yes. I spent my mornings walking the land, learning again how to breathe without bracing for impact. The forest felt different now, lighter, almost celebratory in its rooted stillness. And I felt myself growing stronger in that quiet reaching for a version of myself I'd never been allowed to be. One crisp October afternoon, as golden leaves drifted down in slow spirals, I carried a notebook and a thermos to the meadow. The listening meadow, Grandpa's favorite place. I sat in the grass and wrote, "This land is not mine anymore, but it will always be a part of me." When I finished, I closed the notebook and leaned back against the old oak, letting the sun warm my face. I wasn't lonely. I was held by memory, by legacy, by something bigger than family or inheritance or retreat centers. By truth. And as the wind rustled through the trees, I found myself speaking aloud, not to Grandpa, not to my family, but to the women who might hear this story someday. When someone tells you to choose them over yourself, I whispered, let them leave instead. Sometimes protecting what's yours means losing who never really was. I stood, brushed off my jeans, and walked the path home. The land glowed behind me, steady and eternal. At the porch, I picked up my phone again this time, not with dread, but with intention. I pressed record and began to tell my story out loud, every detail, every wound, every moment of courage. Because somewhere out there, I knew someone needed to hear it. And as I spoke into the quiet afternoon, the truth felt like fresh air. Before I ended the recording, I added one last message. If this story touched you, or if you've ever had to choose yourself in a world that demanded otherwise, share your thoughts below. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me what you've learned about protecting your worth, your boundaries, your legacy. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your voice matters here. Then I stopped the recording, closed my eyes, and let the stillness settle. It was over. And it was only just beginning.